Thank you, Deepak, and thank you, Nick, and thanks to everyone who's pulled this event together over the last few days. It's a delight to be here and to open up on the second day. I'm going to do some of the things that Deepak said I was going to talk about, but I'm going to talk about some other things as well. So what I'm really going to talk about is talk about my 4-year experience of being in this space. And talk a little bit about it, and that, I think that kind of 4-year period covers what's been a rather remarkable 4 years for this industry in Europe. I mean, you could say 4 years ago the industry barely existed in Europe, and now it's come to a point where I think this conference is taking place at a moment of reflection for the industry in many ways, when the period of ascendancy over the last couple of years has now been exposed to regulation and governance, and that presents some pretty complex challenges, which I'll cover, and I'll talk a little bit about the sort of projects that I'm leading at the moment, which hopefully will come to terms with that. So my journey really starts 4 years ago. I just finished up working on a big human rights campaign in the UK, and my friend and philanthropist Paul Birch invited me for a coffee in East London and said that he wanted to legalize cannabis. So he thrust into my hand a copy of a book called Cannabis is Safer Than Alcohol, which was written by Colorado attorney Steve Fox, who some of you might have met. And he said to me, I want you to read that book, and I want you to tell me how we can legalize cannabis in the UK. So, to be honest, I skimmed through the book. I didn't read all the book, right? Okay. It was Steve's a nice guy, but the prose was pretty turgid. But basically what I'd done was what you do these days. I skimmed through the book, I Googled Steve a bit, and I Skyped Steve and said, look, can I come to Colorado and you can tell me how you've done this? So I flew to Colorado the next week, and then I traveled up to Canada and met some folks, and I sort of got a feel for what was happening over there. And plainly, Paul's enthusiasm wasn't misplaced. This is a pretty exciting thing. There's some pretty exciting things going on over there. But the thing that struck me coming back on the plane was really the cultural conditions that apply in Colorado, a place I knew well from working there in the 1990s, and in Canada just wasn't the same in the UK. So I knew that very different political, cultural conditions apply. So the first thing that I'd done upon my return was do what everybody does, everybody in my position does, was look at the data. What's the data say? What do people in Britain feel about cannabis? What do people feel about legalization? So I went to seek out the data, and surprise, there was none. There was no data. Almost nobody had done any polling for years. I couldn't see any evidence of focus groups. There was no evidence of any message testing. There was a few sort of half-baked campaigns that had been running over the previous 30, 40 years. I called up the editor of the Independent Sunday, Rosie Boycott, who ran the last big campaign in the UK in 1997, and she said, I don't want to talk about it again, Steve. I've left it all behind. It was a painful experience. I don't want to talk about it. I'd strongly advise you not to go there. So basically what I'd done was I decided that I would basically go out and start looking at gathering up that data. So over the course of October and November 2015, I started beginning to pull together what I could find in terms of data. So do some initial polling, started on some focus groups, so get some baseline data around which I could begin to think of how to play this. And the culmination of that was we launched this almost 4 years ago. So VaultFace was launched. Now, VaultFace was launched in a very rudimentary way. I basically put up a blog post on WordPress. So that was the height of my ambition at that time. So basically, but it was very deliberately designed to have no leaves, to not be green, and have no obvious association with cannabis. So because I concluded from the work I'd done in terms of polling and focus groups, was that there was some support for reforming cannabis in the UK, but there was no great public clamor for change, and there was actually quite a lot of negative bias against cannabis, particularly among influential middle-class groups. And so basically, I produced this, which looked like any other kind of interesting, funky news website, and I started just calling out my friends in journalism and saying, come and write for my magazine. So the first person I commissioned was someone who many British people know, Harry Wallop, who's probably our most respected consumer affairs journalist. And I said to Harry, go to Colorado. Go to Colorado. I'll pay you to go to Colorado. Tell me what you think as a consumer affairs journalist, what's going on in Colorado. So he went over there, came back, published something for me. It was published in the Sunday Times magazine. And suddenly I wanted to see what the reaction to something like that would be on social media. So gradually I started getting my journalistic friends writing for what they thought was a magazine. We started knocking out podcasting, all the things that magazines do. But very quickly, we sort of started to evolve and started to build up a reputation for some fresh thinking in this space. And then in February 2016, I was able to launch Fault Fast as a magazine. We were able to pull together all our content and make it available through Waterstones in the UK. And I was at that point, on the 16th of February 2016, I launched Fault Fast as a think tank. No longer were we a little WordPress blog. We actually had something physical, a magazine, and we actually had some ideas that we wanted to research. So the rules that we set from the outset for this project were, to my research team that I was starting to hire, so I was hiring barristers, scientists, chemists, and so on. And what I said basically was, if we're going to research something, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to make sure you've got a mainstream media partner who's interested in this issue. Because we won't greenlight the budget for any project unless we know that someone is going to film something at the end of this, so that we're not going to spend any money on the publicity. We need to know that there's a mainstream channel. So in the course of the first year, we were fortunate enough to make films with Channel 4 News, with BBC Newsnight, numerous films with Sky News, and suddenly what we were able to do very quickly is give a reputation for not just innovative thinking in this space, but actually being able to illuminate that through mainstream media. So I can't, unfortunately, click on this website, but as you can see, if you look on the website, you'll see that there have been numerous, we've evolved with numerous reports across a whole range of drug policy issues. Yeah, not just cannabis, but we covered just about all conceivable drug issues. We developed our own TV channel. You can see episode 16 of our TV channel that's on there. We basically got a studio in Soho in the centre of London, which we could turn into a broadcast studio. We were able to host public events for any authors, writers, and so on. So suddenly we're in this basically where we're trying to basically build a kind of very modern think tank. So that's basically where where my journey started. And that enabled us to basically begin the reputation for excellence and for fresh thinking that was able to take us forward. But then, back in 2018, we had a call that kind of changed the work that we were doing, and that was basically a mother in Northern Ireland called me on the phone and said, I've just had my cannabis removed. And basically, she had medical cannabis prescribed in the United States. She came to the UK, and she couldn't access that cannabis. She believed this was the source of this medicine would keep her son alive. So it followed the template of many of these kind of campaigns across the world, yeah, where mothers, a defiant mother with a very sick child, could move the dial on this issue. And so it came to pass. So Charlotte Caldwell, a single mother from Northern Ireland, I was able to basically run a campaign with her, very quickly identified that her and her son would be very powerful campaigners, I had a very clear plan that we executed over the course of last summer. And during the course of that campaign, which ran over a couple of weeks in June and July last year, the government committed to reforming and rescheduling medical cannabis. And that took effect from the 1st of November last year. So what we were really doing there was that we were using a range of the assets that we have, political assets we have through my political connections, but also in the media as well, by creating great, captivating, compelling stories that would grab the media attention. And we were able to, in a sense, so that was the culmination of that kind of first couple of years of Volfast's work. We were able to move very, very quickly, very dynamically, and basically transform the public mood and elicit political change very, very quickly. So immediately after that happened, and we got the change of law was announced finally on the 26th of July, on the last day of our parliamentary session. I disappeared off on holiday and tried to grab some time with my family. And during that time, I got inundated with cannabis companies from all over the world calling me up saying, how do we get into this market? This market's going to be 70 million people in the United Kingdom. Wow, that's incredible. How do we get in here? We're going to come to London. Let us know what we can do. So I was sort of shielding these calls on a daily basis from investors, from mainly Canadian companies. companies around the world sort of saying, we want to get into this market. How do we get into this market? Yeah, how quickly? This market's opening up on the 1st of November. How do we get in? Kind of. So I had no choice but to really do what I'd done next, which was this. So basically, what I'd done was the only obvious thing to do, which is basically say, let's pull these companies together and let's create an industry body. And let's basically develop an industry body that can basically begin to develop, represent the industry, but also in turn increase access to cannabis. So we launched on the 10th of December last year. We had 7 members, 5 from Canada, 2 from other countries. And we basically launched with a 10,000-word blueprint of how we saw medical cannabis rolling out in the UK. Now, what we've basically been able to do since then is grow our membership. We've now got 32 paying members to the CMC, and we're one of the largest industry bodies in the world. We've never been in any doubt about the challenges that we face in terms of being able to get this market moving in the UK. The UK has a particularly unique healthcare culture, and the concession we got from the government had to be considered within the context of that healthcare culture, yeah? So last year in the UK, 97% of all prescriptions written were written by the NHS, and 99.4% of all those prescriptions were written for licensed medicines. So where we were parking cannabis, we were parking cannabis inside the NHS, and in the NHS were almost all the prescriptions. Only last year, I think, of the 13.4 billion that was spent on pharmaceutical drugs by the NHS last year, only 90 million pounds was spent on specials. I was into the specials category where cannabis was going to sit. So we've been developing coherent policy arguments ever since. It's been a bit of shadow boxing in the UK, as many of you know, because we've been waiting for NICE, who perform an important job in terms of keeping the NHS from going bankrupt. More generally, that's the role, but they've been considering the recommendations about how these products should be prescribed in the NHS. So their deliberations finished last week, and that's enabled us to move into a whole new phase of our work. So over the course of the next few weeks, we'll be making big announcements about the work that we're going to be doing over the course of the next year. Central to that is the research agenda. In order to move this industry forward in the UK, and I would argue across the European Union and in other new jurisdictions, there needs to be a new emphasis on research. The optics of the industry need to look at their pro-research. So we'll be launching the first ever global clinical research conference between the industry and the NHS and the NHR very soon. That's going to be taking place in London in April next year. And from that relationship that we've formed with the NHS and with the key authorities in the UK, I think we can begin to build the sort of relationships between clinical practice and between the industry, which are vital in terms of moving things forward. But I realize I'm only down to 35 seconds, Deepak, so you'll have to forgive me for a second. But basically what's happened since the formation of the CMC is we started getting calls from February this year, after the European Union designated CBD as a novel food. So basically, at that point, we started getting calls from big CBD companies, particularly in the US, Charlotte's Web, Mile High Labs. People contacted us saying, we need someone to represent us in the UK. Can your organization extend its remit to cover CBD as well as medicine? And what we spent the last 6 months doing, because I knew nothing about CBD, if I'm being honest, is we've basically been doing a really deep dive into all the market data, public attitudes, product testing of CBD products, and 2 weeks ago, we launched the ACI. So basically what we have set up is a new organization that is for companies in the CBD space who want to operate in the UK, but who want to become fully legally compliant. And by legally compliant, that means being compliant with the new novel foods regulations. This is challenging for this sector. It is a challenging, complex regulatory kind of environment that we're moving into. But the issue we got in the UK is perplexing for my friends, particularly from North America, because what we have at the moment is medical cannabis, which is legal, but almost completely inaccessible, because it's only available via a small number of doctors under very particular conditions. And a CBD product was technically illegal, which is everywhere. So I weighed the CBD market in June and July with Navigant. And it's about £380 million in the UK. There's about 1.6 million UK adults who are routinely using CBD products. The trajectory is upwards and onwards. But as everyone knows, if you read the Leafly reports from yesterday, the market is crying out for some regulation. So I published some data last week on public attitudes to CBD in the UK, which reweighed the size of the market, but also looked at consumer attitudes. And the outcomes from that survey were suggested there's still a big prize for the industry in the UK. So that survey says that 45% of people in the UK do not trust CBD products. And about 48% of the population said they would consider buying a CBD product if they knew it was properly regulated. So at the moment, unless things change, novel foods authorization is the pathway to legal compliance in the UK, but I would argue it's a pathway to a sustainable, innovative industry with products that people can trust. So we've started the process of moving all the companies that are in the ACI, and that's a lot of the companies that are in the CMC have moved across to the ACI, but we've had 150 applications to join the ACI in the last 10 days, which we're working through at the moment. But underneath the ACI is a charter covering 7 issues. Now, the single biggest piece of work that we need to do in this industry, and I would argue the single biggest contributor to the sustainability of this industry in the European Union and beyond, is focusing on the standardization of analytical testing methodologies. Without that, we're going to continue to get the stories that were in Leafly yesterday, the sort of stories that we ran in the newspapers through the summer. If we don't have common protocols around analytical testing methodologies, we can go nowhere in this industry with confidence. So we've got Dr. Parveen Batara, who's one of the world's leading cannabinoid chemists, who's working with us on the development of those standards. And we're working very closely with regulatory authorities in the EU and the UK on that. So what I'm really covering there really is 3 plays. One, we talk about more broadly about the whole volte-face, which talk more broadly around all drug issues, but with particular focus on looking at how we can open up a debate about legalizing of cannabis. Gradually, that transitioned us into a space which is around about medicine, and finally, we're in the space now which is about regulation. So in that journey that I've taken the last 4 years, I covered a broad spectrum, all the things that everybody needs to be thinking about if they want to open up this market and to build this market in the European Union. Some of it is about old-fashioned campaigning techniques, old-fashioned advocacy, working with the media, setting up parliamentary groups, engaging politically, framing good arguments, collecting good polling data, testing messages in focus groups. Some of it, in the case of medicine, is basically making clinical arguments. So nothing that comes out of the CMC is not a clinically led argument. We can't win this with arguments other than ones that are clinical. So if you saw the paper we published yesterday in response to the NICE guidelines, it was published with 2 clinical researchers, with a forward from my medical lead, who's a surgeon and a cannabinoid scientist. So everything has to be clinically led, yeah? So the tricks of the trade that got us into this space are no longer at the moment useful. What we need now are really powerful clinical arguments that can unlock us, because the impediments are not really political any longer, they're clinical. And then finally, in the space around CBD and wellness, the arguments there are not clinical, the arguments there are about regulatory. So my investment from the membership fees that I've taken in the last few months has been heavily weighted towards investing in the best regulatory professionals in the life sciences field that I can find. So we've recruited a whole team of regulatory professionals over the course of the last year. So if you ever get a chance to come to Hanway Street in central London, where my studio is based, just near Soho, what you'll see in there is a team of campaigners every day, still pushing the envelope on legalizing cannabis. If you get a chance to go on the BBC iPlayer, you'll see the movie we made with the BBC earlier this year in Canada with the MP David Lammy, a good example of that. Check out the Evening Standards campaign, the biggest ever newspaper-led campaign in the UK, which we've been working on with George Osborne, the editor of the Evening Standard. I basically put that on the front page of one of the newspapers, and cannabis is now going to be a big issue in the next London mayoral election. But alongside them, you'll see lots of doctors who are basically drafting clinical protocols, who are engaged on a day-to-day basis with NIHR, who are putting together proposals for our members to submit to the NIHR for research funding. And then alongside that, downstairs, you'll see a bunch of regulatory professionals who are basically developing protocols around analytical testing, lawyers helping people make the first applications for novel foods authorization. So in some ways, what I'm conferring there is basically it's the complexity of this issue going forward. If there's people in the room who are thinking about the money side of this, where we're going to earn money, I always give, at investment conferences I attend, I always just said, here's my simple piece of advice in the EU. Get a pharmaceutical-grade CBD product and make a novel foods application. If you're interested in the next 3 to 5 years, that's where I see where the revenues are. So thank you for the chance to speak today. Do you want me to take some questions, Steve? Yes, please. Yeah, sure.
Are you open to collaboration with people in the US?
Yes, I am, yeah. And we get lots of requests from our members to come to the US and do some of these things in the US, as we do around the world. But yes, we are going to do some. So I'm going to be doing some trips around across the US next year to look at some of the I think particularly in the context of what's happening with CBD. I think if you look at our charter, I think our charter is a foundation for building credibility for the whole CBD industry across the world, yeah.
Steve, I have a follow-up question.
Yep.
So we are working with a couple of members from the US already at the CMC. Yep. What I wanted to ask more was, what can the UK learn? I mean, we won't get into the Brexit issue at all, but what can we learn from countries like Denmark or Malta that have legislated, medical cannabis really well from a patient perspective?
So last week we hosted a delegation from the Danish government on the Day of the NICE guidelines, and we also published some new data, which you'll probably read about, and a lot of people are citing every day, which is around the number of people who are using cannabis illicitly in the UK. So we're at a stage at the moment in the UK where, to some extent, we've exhausted clinical routes through the NHS. That'll be and the view of government, the NHS, is these companies now need to invest in research. They need to be investing in RCTs, and we'll come back to you when you've started doing that. But I think the Denmark project is a particularly interesting one, because what the Danes have done 3 years ago is said that they came from the same place the UK government is. There isn't enough clinical evidence to support the prescribing this in our public healthcare systems, but there is significant evidence of people self-medicating. And as a society, perhaps it's a very Danish argument, very Scandinavian argument, as a society we can't tolerate people who are self-medicating and can't ignore that. So the project they put in place to accelerate access, to accelerate clinical learning, to start licensing cultivation in Denmark, and gradually moving people transitioning people out of the black market is, I think, a noble policy idea, and one that we've shared extensively across Whitehall. So we've built contacts between the Danish government, the British government, between officials and all the relevant officials. It's a sort of argument that we might be able to make after the general election. So I think basically that sort of model of trying to make an exception for cannabis is really it's the biggest single challenge we face. Do you make an exception for cannabis? Because as everybody in this room knows, the only jurisdictions in the world where people are routinely accessing medical cannabis are jurisdictions where people have developed made exceptions for cannabis and built a separate sort of regulatory track.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite unfortunate to see the UK go down the path that Australia has gone down, and we'll hear from Rees later today. But Australia has taken, 5 years to really build out their system, and it's been a terrible failure. So it'd be unfortunate for the UK to actually go down that path.
Yeah. I think it's important to say about the UK does not have a medical cannabis program. And last year, when we were campaigning what the government didn't concede was they were going to create a medical cannabis program. What they were able to do is facilitate the access of medical cannabis products into the specialist category. And I think that's an important distinction. One down the back here.
I was having a hard time hearing your, it was on the foods application?
Yep.
Could you say that again?
So in January this year, the European Union categorized CBD extracts as novel foods. So technically, every jurisdiction in the European Union can now enforce that, it can introduce enforcement measures against CBD products that are sold without a novel foods authorization. Now, it's down to each jurisdiction to decide how they do that.
What kind of foods?
It's novel foods, so it's basically novel foods, yeah.
And then you said so you thought that's where the future of CBD income.
Well, I think the future. If you're asking me what the future of income for cannabis companies in the EU is, based on all the data that we have, then I think, and knowing the regulatory challenges that we face, then it seems to me that it's high-grade CBD with a novel foods authorization attached to it. Yeah, because at any stage, any CBD product can be removed from the shelves without it.
We have time for one last question, Steve, before we wrap it up.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. One thing that I'm finding a little disconcerting about the way the industry is heading in total is that there is way too, in my opinion and many others, way too much overemphasis on CBD as the silver bullet. And I think that there's, maybe everybody needs to almost take a breather and a step back and look at the history and look at the other components, particularly CBG and some of the other chemicals, and also the non-decarboxylized portions of cannabis plant, which is THCA and CBDA, which have fantastic medical, obviously anecdotally medical.
Sorry, can you come to the question?
So I just wanted to see, where is this going with respect to what you're trying to do in terms of the whole plant as opposed to CBD?
Well, I think as you can see from the presentation I've given, we're evolving quite quickly and we're pretty adaptive to the changing nature of the market. But I was giving a response to a question I was anticipating I would hear, which is how do you make money in this place, right? Okay, because no one knows how to make money. But there's only a market in Germany and there's no market anywhere else. And when I go to investment conferences, which I occasionally go to, and investors ask me, where are we going to get a return? My view at the moment is based on what I know and the market data that I've got and the consumer attitudes I can see, is that it's a high-grade CBD product that's safeguarded against future enforcement by filing a novel foods authorization. And if you want to be involved in that process, you can contact me at the ACI and we'll put you in the tunnel.
Thanks a lot, Steve.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.